if I give you the same name as I gave you on that paper, will you?
All right. Could you please give me your full name as it is recorded on your birth certificate, sir?
William Edward Goodwin,
Where were you born and raised?
Dayton, Ohio.
What was your job in the military?
I was drafted in the service, and I was a school teacher, and I taught. I was probably the only one that did the same thing in the military as I did in civilian life.
Did you feel that were the students you had in the military better students than the ones you had in the school system?
I will say about the military. They gave me a course after I graduated from college.
Mm-hmm.
They gave me a course on how to teach, and they gave me a course in 4 weeks, which took me 4 years to learn in college.
Uh-huh.
The whole thing. And I'm dealing with adults in the service, men from 18 to 55 years old, so there's no comparison between the two.
Mm-hmm.
They're good students and bad students. They were just as enthused, because if you did well in the classes I was instructing, you were less likely to have to go up on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
If you were educated.
I see. Next question is, what was your first unit duty station? That's pretty much...
Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Okay. And that's where you performed the majority of the teaching duties?
After I went through basic training and the war was going pretty heavy, this guy was teaching these classes. I don't know what these classes, and I thought I could teach this. It was combat construction foreman school. So I asked him, what do you do to be an instructor? And he says, the first thing he stuck his head, the first thing you got to do is be a college graduate. And I said, what's the second thing? And then I went on to the school there for the 4 weeks. And then I taught in D.C., and they had everything from colonels on down to privates came to this school. During the war, you became a master sergeant when you came out. And then ROTC, those who, I can't think of the word right now, become lieutenants, also took these classes. And it was, I taught the rigging and tramway and building bridges and all. It was all engineering stuff, demolitions, that type of stuff.
So you were a college graduate before you entered the service?
Right, I had 4 years of college.
And you think that greatly benefited?
I had a man that was second most decorated guy in the Second World War, Mac McDermott, and he was going to one of these classes, which I was going to, and he took a liking to me. He was about 40 and I was 21, and he said they never put me on the front lines because I had an education, and it proved to be that way, because every time they'd come and they'd interview me, they said, oh, you're a college grad, and then they'd set you aside. So I went to 4 or 5 different schools. I went to CVR warfare school. I went to school how to teach. I went to school how to interview Spanish-speaking troops coming over that said that they didn't understand English. So they sent us to school, and we interviewed those for a week or two after they come off the ships. I spent most of my time going to school, learning to teach all these different subjects. I just kept one school. Most of my time in the service was going to school or teaching.
Did you perform the same duties when you were actually sent over to Korea at the end of the war? What did you do actually there?
In Korea? Well, the first thing is I went to Sasebo, Japan. That's where we landed. And may I say, when we came 50 miles out to sea, you could smell Busan. It smelled that bad. It was horrible. But we went to Japan. There's where they sent us to some schooling or whatever, and that's when they sent me to CBR warfare school, radio combat radiological school. So after that, they sent me to Korea, and then that's when they. First, I was instructing in the States. And while I was there at Sasebo, we went to Hiroshima, if you're interested in that. And it's this one side of the city is on a mountain, and the other side, the mountain goes right down the middle of the city. And where they dropped the H-bomb, the one side there was nothing there, totally obliterated, and the other was like nothing had ever happened. It just, I was just talking with a man from Japan the other day. He said you wouldn't even know that they dropped the bomb there. But they took us across the bay there. Sasebo was just about 20, 30 miles across the bay to get to Hiroshima. And it was quite interesting to see what had happened there.
Well, I'm sure at that time, I mean, that would have been approximately 10 years.
Yes, after the bomb. And nothing had been done, the devastation was still there. If you want to know about the people in Japan, they were so poor, we didn't do KP, clean up afterwards and kitchen duty and stuff, because they would be there with 5-gallon buckets and they would take the garbage from our mess hall and carry them home at night because they were starving. So they'd put the fat in one, bread in another, bones in another. They took everything.
In Japan?
In Japan. And the same in Korea. They took all of our garbage and stuff, took it home to eat. That's how bad things were. It was pitiful. Of course, they've come a long way since then.
This is kind of a difficult question, possibly. What were your feelings towards the whole conflict? I mean, in the enemy.
I'll have to go back a little earlier, about 1950 or somewhere in the war. I was catching magazines in the summertime, the McCalls. I was in college, either a sophomore. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was on the third trick. They shut the presses down and said the Korean War had started. And as far as liking or disliking anybody, I didn't have that feeling. We were at war. It was a necessary thing that had to be done. And I used to kid my friends who were in the First World or Second World War. I said, "You guys really messed up. Now we got to go clean up your mess." But naturally, nobody likes war. But it was a thing I had to do, and I'm really glad I served.
It's probably, if nothing else, a really great learning experience.
Oh, tremendous! You wouldn't give anything for it. Again, the stuff that you went through and what you learned and the discipline and how to take orders and know what to do. I think everyone should have to have a 1-year service. Everyone in this country, men and women alike. It would just to shape our young people up. They wouldn't be in these attitudes they've got now.
Okay. Later on in the conflict, I mean, did you have any feelings about the whole MacArthur part of everything? I mean, did you feel that
You're talking about Japan and MacArthur?
MacArthur and Truman? I mean, the disagreements that they had about the conflict.
Well, I thought MacArthur was a good general. He did, and they had disagreements, but and they didn't like each other. But MacArthur did not have the right to do what he said to Truman. But I liked MacArthur. Truman had to make that decision, but I had no particular feelings one way or the other. They were both right, but you don't do that to the commander-in-chief. If you want to do that, you would, behind closed doors, you don't do it in public. But he was a good general. He shaped up Japan, brought it back to where out of that devastation they had, and he brought it back to a great society as it is today. I have no hard feelings towards the Japanese or the Koreans. One of those things in history that happens under bad leadership, and the people are sometimes driven to things that they don't want to do, but they get caught up in it and they have no choice, just like Hitler. I don't dislike German people, but I dislike what Hitler did to the German people.
I know before we started the interview, you'd mentioned some things about how you had enlisted first, you said?
I tried to.
And was
Get
that
in the Air Force.
Was that after you graduated college? Or?
No, I was in college. It was a sophomore year in college when the war broke out. And these two friends of mine said if rather than to get drafted, we thought we were going to get drafted right out of college.
Mm-hmm.
That if we went down and tried to get in the Air Force and become pilots, we wouldn't be drafted. So we went to Cincinnati. I flunked the eye test, which I had this bad eye, astigmatism and whatever. And the other two, they went on. Then they quit college. This is Miami in Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and they went on to the service. And I came back to school and then went through ROTC, my remaining 2 years in college.
Mm-hmm.
And that also, if you went to ROTC, they didn't draft you because if they needed you, they could pull you out, but they were teaching you how to become a soldier and an officer.
Mm-hmm.
I was offered at that time to become an officer, but I had already graduated from college, and I really didn't want to do the military. Mm-hmm. When I got in the military, they saw I had that, and they wanted to send me to, can't even think of the word, officer training school, but I said no. I've already made my decision.
Mm-hmm.
But it would have been an interesting life. I would have enjoyed the military. If you had several occupations, that would be one I would have enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
If I.
I know you have some photos there, and you were talking with me earlier. I guess there was some foreign nationals in your outfit when you were in Korea. Exactly, I know you were saying something about that individual was your house, or your...
It was just a house. We called him a houseboy, housekeeper,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. His name was Jong. There were 8 of us, I believe, lived in a tent. They've got a picture of this tent, and the tents were lined up, dozens of them, and that's where we stayed. It was in a tent.
Mm-hmm.
The temperature in Korea, the south part of Korea, South Korea, is also almost identical to Ohio and West Virginia. But when you get to North Korea, that's when it gets down below 30 degrees, and now you're getting into China and Russia and that area where the temperature's really terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But so you lived in a tent and had 2 little pot-belly stoves, and you sat around in T-shirts, and it was 45 inside, and you thought it was hot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was an instructor there. I taught flamethrowers, napalm bombs, and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other South Koreans in your unit?
There were the natives were there. Yes, every place.
Uh-huh.
They weren't in the military with us, but they were at the base. They did the cleaning. They did work around it.
Oh, I see.
Went to a barber. The barber there was a Korean. I would go to him that would get our haircuts, and he was telling me how rich one of his friends was.
Uh-huh.
I said he's really rich. I said, what do you mean he's rich? He said he owns an ox.
Uh-huh.
I said, well, why does that make him rich? Well, he says he can go out there and plow rice fields with the ox, and he makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because that's how he was rich. He had an ox.
Uh-huh.
They also, we call them deddy tanks or whatever. They took the human waste and they collected it, and then they paid their taxes with it because they used that for their fertilizer. They
Yes.
didn't waste anything.
Uh-huh. Well, they grew a lot of rice.
That was their main thing, and they hand planted that in the swamps. I got a picture here of some rice paddies, but the women and children were out there planting the rice and walking through those rice paddies all the time. They were in the valley, and the people lived up on the hills. That's their main subsidy.
I know you said these people were very poor. Was there much disease or anything like that you recall?
They told us if we ever got captured by the enemy, or do not eat any of their food because we'd be dead in a couple of days.
Uh-huh.
Because they had no refrigeration. They were highly spiced with salt, onions, and garlic, and they would bury it in the ground. These people had a constitution that was so strong it was unbelievable. Because down through the years, the weak died and the strong stayed. So, no, there was no sickness.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were out working, I was like I said, and they were building something, and they would stand, and when a block of wood, 2 inches square, they'd pick it up and stave it so they could take it home and wait around for that, and wait around for scraps. For heat, they had a little potbelly stove in that home. They'd sit around it, have a blanket over their laps, and they'd sit there at night. The houses were rice thatch, maybe quarter of an inch thick, like a piece of cardboard, except with rice was the base thing of rice stalks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that was their homes, and then, and the temperature got down to 0 in 20s and 30s. But
I know you were saying that some of them had civilian jobs, I guess is what you're saying, and provided services to you guys. How were they paid? I mean, did you guys pay them, or did they receive food or something?
Just like any place else. I mean, some of them have their own societies going on, and we were there, occupying their country. And they had their regular thing. Then there were those that worked for the Army, and they got paid that way, and the others just worked in their regular civilian jobs as if the Army wasn't there.
Okay. Did they actually own property, or, I mean, as in land?
Yes.
They did?
Just the same as here.
Okay.
Except where the part that we'd occupied on the 38th parallel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. During that time, was there any sort of conflicts? I know you said you went in, you were over there in 1954?
54.
Okay. Was there still any ongoing conflicts like at the 38th parallel?
Occasionally, yes. We were only a few miles from the 38th parallel. I'm going to take a guess, but 10 miles or so was where company headquarters was, a 3rd Division that I was in, and I was at the school at the company headquarters. Mm-hmm. The only time I never actually got where they had you in units, I never actually got to my company because they assigned you to a company, but then the headquarters took you out, and I was an instructor. But when they let me go home, said it's time to go home, I had to go back to my headquarters. So I was about 3-4 days on the 38th parallel on the side of a mountain in a tent. Nothing was happening. Mm-hmm. I didn't know any of the guys, but I had to go back there to get discharged from Korea to come home. So that was the only time I was on the 38th parallel.
Okay. All right.
The war stopped about 6 months. I think it was around in July. And then I went to Japan in January, so it was that close to the end. Mm-hmm. I used to kid everybody that the North Koreans were cowards. They knew I was coming. Mm-hmm. It's true. I told you that before, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay. Cowards. I said, here he comes. The kid's coming.
Did after you came back to the States, were you able to use any sort of veteran services to help pay for your education that you'd gotten or anything like that?
Somehow or other, I managed to have a high enough point average in college that the Army offered opportunity. My mother wrote and told me that if your grades are good enough, you could get out 6 months early out of the service if you went to work on your master's degree. So I had her check it out, and sure enough, I had a high enough point average in college to do it. So we applied for it, and I was sitting in one of my favorite spots on a Saturday afternoon at a club having a drink or two, and somebody came in and yelled, "It's Goodwin here." And I raised my hand. They said, "You're going home." I said, "Don't mess with me this afternoon." He said, "We're not messing with you. Get your stuff and get out there in a Jeep. You got 5 minutes. You're going home." Mm-hmm. I said, "You're kidding." So when I came back and went on the GI Bill paid me $110 a month. And I also got my master's degree for free. Mm-hmm. So I started my master's degree. And that brought me home. And then I started back to my teaching job that I'd left.
Did that spur you to get your master's? Is that something you'd considered before?
I had enough time to consider it. I started teaching in September, got drafted in October. And I probably would have at some time or down the road, but that just made it happen quicker.
Mm-hmm. I know you've brought in some photos with you that we're going to scan as part of the collection.
I don't have any particular order, but if we could maybe just want to show you those first.
Okay.
Like I told you, there's no trees in Korea because anything that would grow, they whacked it down the head, and that's a tall Korean guy. This picture here would probably be in Busan, where I got discharged from. Mm-hmm. I must tell you this story.
Okay.
When in Busan, I was only there a few days, maybe a week. I can't remember. Down the center of the street was a ditch, concrete, 2 foot wide, about 3 foot deep, and all the wastewater and sewer went right into that, down the main street of the town, mm-hmm. And it stunk. Well, I came back again 6 months later, 8 months later. I can't give you the exact date. They put us where they just discharge us, and there's a rice paddy. They discharge you, and there's a stream, and up at the end of the stream, we're talking about a couple 100 yards. The woman's up there feeding her pigs, 2 or 3 pigs, and they're wading in the water. A little farther down, somebody's going to the bathroom in it, and a little farther down, a woman's washing her clothes, and a little farther down the stream, a woman's taking the water into the house. You wondered if they got sick. You die from drinking that water, and they were doing it in reverse. The pig should have been at the other end, mm-hmm. But that's the way that, and they took rocks and pounded rocks together, as you heard about it, to wash to get the dirt out of their clothes. I mean, it was really way back.
So they didn't have any water wells per se. It was
some places they but very few. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're going way back. When we went through Korea, and when they dropped us off and they put us on a train, the kids came out of the mountains running down for food. And here's a picture of a couple of kids running down alongside a railroad track. I don't know what this one is. You know what that is, Mom? What's the second one there?
This is a cemetery.
What were the rails used for the most there?
They transport our army supplies and to bring the troops in.
Mm-hmm. There were no paved roads in Korea.
Oh, they're all mud.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a group. This little girl had to be about 3 years old, and they come down out of the hills, and they had to have guards on the trains because they'd strip the trucks and stuff that were hauling it, steal the stuff right off. Anyhow, those little kids there with a baby on the back. Here they are coming down to the trains as we're going through Korea, hoping they told us not to, but didn't pay any attention. We threw our sea rations out and gave them to them, mm-hmm. because we knew they were starving to death.
So it would have been a difficult situation.
Yeah, it was terrible. He's a good-looking guy.
This would have been you at 20, 21?
21 or 22, yeah. Yeah, 21. This isn't me at that time, but that's the place I was when they came and told me I was going home. You can tell it's a bad place. A bar. Here's a rice paddy.
Those places were frequented by our GIs?
It was right in the middle of the tents. Mm-hmm. Just on the base, mm-hmm. Some place for us to go.
Yes.
There's some more rice paddies. There's home. This is just a house along the road. That's the one. That's the one's got the woman's. You see this? I was going down the road. I don't know why I was there. I was walking down this dusty road. Had to be going someplace, and the guy came along, and I said, "May I take your takey picture?" Mm-hmm. Voice on, take picture. Then he looks at her. Mama's on behind. She was carrying the A-frame, carrying all this on her back, and if you look, you can see her squatting behind. She no getting picture.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, they wouldn't, and the dust was a couple inches deep. Here's some kids begging. One of the saddest things that happened to me, not to me, but at the time, when these kids were begging along the train, and this nasty old sergeant was eating pineapple, and he threw the pineapple juice in that kid's face. And I would have loved to have stood up and hit him, but I was a PFC, and they would have court-martialed me. But I just couldn't believe anybody could do that to a child.
Did these did the Koreans they had a little bit of, I guess they'd learned in the few years some limited English, apparently.
Yes, they're very good. Most countries do. The Japanese spoke fluent English too. They taught it in the schools. It was one time was leading. I imagine this woman here is probably only 35 years old. Show how. This would be Pusan. We came in. I told you about how bad it was. Again, there's a picture with no trees. We were only about 40 miles from Seoul, and they let us go. They gave us a day so we could go in. So we went in on the bus. And you'd go through the city, and every now and then you'd see this building, and it was just destroyed totally. It was still from the Korean War. And there'd be big potholes on one side of the street and the other. And so I asked, why are these buildings this way? I don't know if you're familiar with history, but the Japanese occupied Korea for 30 or 40 years. And anything the Japanese built, they would not touch or fix. They just let them stand. Of course, they're gone now. But there's a big building right down the capital of Korea. They wouldn't fix it. I don't know what that's a picture of. There's the houses we lived in, just a tent, more tents.
So you basically got the feeling that they weren't real pleased with beforehand either with the Japanese.
No, they were occupied for 40 years, enslaved. That's why they had nothing. These pictures are really nothing pictures. That one you can't see. I don't know where that building is, Margaret. I don't know why I'm standing in front of it.
It says living quarters at Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima?
Bill Younger in the picture.
Yeah, okay. There's where our tents were inside by the mountains. You could see those. That's just a picture. Another picture. Here we are. Here we are on the ranges, shooting bazookas and whatever. And these are pictures of things that we did here, probably in the States. We build bridges, Bailey bridges, pontoon bridges, all that. That's what I studied and learned. And all the stuff I learned on how to build roads and stuff, I knew I'd never use, except I have a campground now with over 2 miles of roads in it, and use this stuff every day. People wonder, how do you know all that stuff? How do you know what kind of rock to put in the base of the road before it's built? Because that's what they taught us. Anyhow, it was good. It was a good experience, and I worked hard at it. I knew I was going to learn something, so I
benefited you your entire life.
Right, and it was an opportunity. I remember these guys' faces, but not a single name. The guys were looking 50-some years ago. Here's what a pontoon bridge looks like. I don't know if you ever saw one, but you put these different things together, and you put the bed down, and that way they can drive their trucks across real quick.
How long would it take to do something like? I mean,
Well, a day or two. It would normally, if you had to build a bridge, would be years.
mm-hmm.
The Bailey Bridge is the strongest bridge there is. It's built up on angles. I don't think they got a picture of a Bailey Bridge in here. Anyhow, so my son Buzzy had to make this thing in a construction class in college, and they wanted to see how strong it would be. Out of toothpicks. And they said you had to make this, and it had to hold a certain amount of weight. So he came to me, and he asked me what I should do. I said, you put a lot of triangles in it, because the triangle is the strongest thing of any form of construction. So he built it. The other kid's stuff started collapsing at 2 and 3 pounds. His lasted to 40.
Mm-hmm.
His professor couldn't believe it. But if you ever see anything that's built, it's in a triangle. Old houses, if you remember, before they had plywood, they always nailed a strip across the 2x4s at an angle from the floor up to the corner. Did you ever notice that in old construction?
Mm-hmm.
That was because it formed a triangle. Otherwise, the stuff would wave. But it's triangle. You can't push a triangle down. You can push a rectangle or a circle, but not a triangle. Those are my barracks in Virginia, Belvoir, Virginia. And there, I guess I don't know who those were out on the firing range. There's a picture of me in the mirror.
I don't think those are any good.
Those are not just pictures of silly pictures. Anything else? Is that it, Margaret?
Well, the pictures in the books there, I don't know how many of those. That starts Korea there.
When I got over, I knew nothing about. I tell you about learning to teach. Finally, they said it was okay and I could instruct.
Mm-hmm.
But when they had a lesson plan and you went by that lesson plan and you better be within 2-3 minutes, and you didn't know when a lieutenant or captain or a colonel or a major was going to walk in, you had a person in the back of the room, and he would come in, he would walk over, this ever who was there was your assistant, would open up the page and point to it where you were, and he'd look up and give you the go ahead, private, continue with your class. And buddy, if you weren't there, you'd answer later on, why weren't you on that page at that time teaching that?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't try to keep anything a secret. They let you know what they wanted you to learn, and it's just entirely different. We mess around in our classrooms today, and it's like we're competing, trying to see if the kid's smart enough to figure out what we're teaching them. They let you know what you had to know, and that's what you did.
Mm-hmm.
And it did wonders for me. I taught in a high school, 3,500 kids, 50-60% black, and nothing. I'm just saying it was a tough high school, inner city Dayton, and I learned more there about discipline and teaching than 4 years of college ever taught me.
Mm-hmm.
This is a train going through Japan when we went or Korea. When we landed, I was probably one of 1,000 that stayed up all night because I knew I'd never be back again, and watched everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids were coming out of school in the morning, 5 or 6 in the morning, along the walkway, and there'd be old mamas on sitting down squatting, taking a pee, as the kids walked right by her, things you don't think of here. Seoul, Korea, they had to go to the bathroom. They stood right on the street, right in the capital, and went.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's anything else. That's Sasebo, Japan. That was their naval base, but that's where they put us. And that isn't Hiroshima, is it?
So
That's Seoul. Okay.
Would you have any advice or anything for our men and women that are currently in service or are planning on going overseas? Or
Well, I give the same advice I give to anybody. You make the best of what you got and enjoy it and learn from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be bitter and grumble and complain, it's not going to work. Life. Here's good pictures of Pusan, how they lived. It's all changed now. I mean, they're just as well off as we are. There's kids again along the railroad tracks, and we were in demolitions and stuff. I used to tell Margaret how they have all these pictures, and the guy's got a little stick of dynamite and blows something up. It doesn't happen that way, but they showed us how to blow up. We'd go out and figure out how to blow up the bridges in Washington, D.C. We were only 15, 20 miles from D.C. or Belvoir. And you put the dynamite down, you got to cover it up. It blows the line of least resistance. You don't lay it there on the floor, it ain't going to do anything to that floor. It's going to go up. You have to if you pile stuff on top of it, then it'll go down. Different things like that. We didn't have all the things. The best we had plastic was C3. But I taught napalm bombs, flamethrowers, all kinds of good stuff. What?
So here's a flamethrower.
I did so good on my first class in the flamethrowers, and we're shooting it, showing them how to use them. Set the mountainside on fire. I had to bring out about 50 more people. We spent 3 hours putting the fire out before we were going to burn down half of Korea. I think it was the last class they had me give on flamethrowers. Oh, you.
Some of the equipment, I guess. This is a book our grandson made for him. It's a high school project, or a grade school project for his life. And he gave it to him for Christmas, and teacher said you should know something about your family. So this area here was dedicated to his grandpa in the service. And then he designed some things, invented some things, and that's what this was.
What was that?
Well, the cup holder.
Oh, yeah.
Put on the side of your car to hold it.
I invented that before it was done, but I don't. You probably don't remember a cup holders slid down the windows of cars, do you? Anyhow, I came up with the idea, but I just used a piece of a coat hanger and a tuna can. They didn't have plastics then. And then when plastic came, of course, somebody else did it.
Made a spinner. This was his father. His father had over 200 rubber inventions, and so
He invented the V-belt on the car. My dad did.
So that was
The V-belt?
Yeah. Along with hundreds of others.
well, this is just
Well, I appreciate your time, sir. And,
Anyhow, for life, you know, anytime, no matter where you are, what you do, you gotta do the best you are at where you are, and it'll always work out. People give up too quick, get discouraged, and I'm in the process now in the campground. I've had approximately 50 different signs made. We're starting to put them up. I don't know how it's going to go over, but the one I hung above the main entrance door to the store says, "Love life and it'll love you." And then beside it says, what's the other one? The one over where you go out to get your propane tank, it says, "Love, forgive, and forget." And then believe and succeed, and think and grow rich, and winners never quit, and
words of wisdom.
And they're going to be about 50 or 60 like that. Other ones are stuff like buy your fishing license here and all that stuff. But I'm putting them up and seeing if it's going to help the young people have more positive attitude. People have such negative attitudes. And there's no reason to. Life is good and it's great and it's full of difficulties and it never stops. But every now and then you get a curveball. Sometimes I get depressed for a few days or a week. Then I come back and tackle the problem, right?
Right.
We're going to take all of our employees to the speaking thing here in a couple of weeks down in Dayton. Um, Powell,
Colin
Powell, Dr. Schuler,
Terry Bradshaw.
Bradshaw, Forbes, whatever. But I'm not going. I've been to 2 or 3 of them because my positive thinking is too good now. At my age, I don't need any more.
Yes.
Or as I say to the guys, I can't soar like an eagle when I'm working with turkeys.